So, the ending of the Doctor Who episode Lucky Day gave us some answers to some questions we'd had since the opening episode of the seasons, in a very timey-wimey way. But it also raised something of an issue for me. There's an element of it which, on the surface, if you think about it, doesn't work. But I think I know why. Welcome to Culture Filter, I am the Film Filter, and this is where I talk about all the geeky pop culture that I like and consume. Stuff like Doctor Who, a lot of Doctor Who in fact, so if you like Doctor Who and like lore videos, reviews, theory videos and all that sort of stuff, then do click down below the subscribe button, wherever it is. Now, we're going to kind of explain the ending of the episode Lucky Day. I'm talking specifically that scene where he's in his prison cell after being captured by units and sent down. He finds himself suddenly within the TARDIS and confronted by the Doctor, who gives him this kind of interventionist speech, maybe hoping to change his ways, but certainly a good talking down to. None of which seems to sink in and make a difference to Conrad's personality, and he ends up laughing at the Doctor and being sent back to his cell. But there's a few important things in that scene that do factor into other episodes, and the story arc overall. Now, the first thing we have to remember is that we see the Doctor at 3 points in his timeline throughout this episode. We get this scene here, and let's first of all establish when that is, because this is clearly after, for him, he's dropped off Ruby, but before he's met Belinda. So after the Empire of Death, but before the Robot Revolution. We know this because Conrad mentions Belinda's name and the Doctor doesn't know who he's talking about.
Have you met Belinda Chandra yet? Who?
Which solves one of the mysteries we had from the opening episode of the season, where he tells Belinda that someone had given him her name.
I was told about you by someone. It's kind of a long story and I've got to be careful about timelines. But he told me your name. Like it would be important.
So we now know that the person that gave the Doctor Belinda's name was in fact Conrad. Another bit of the Doctor's life we see in this episode is his early adventures with Ruby. In fact, we get a specific line that tells us exactly when their first adventure with the Shriek happened, because Ruby in one point mentions,
half an hour ago we were hanging out with the Beatles.
So this comes directly after the Devil's Cord for them. And Conrad is there a year ago from the main setting of this episode, seeing Ruby and the Doctor defeat the Shriek from a distance. But we've also got that opening scene from the episode, where the Doctor and Belinda land in 2007, as they find out, and they set up the Vindicator to do another reading or whatever it is the Vindicator is doing to try and get Belinda home. And there, they meet a young boy, Conrad. This instance, this happening here, is where Conrad first learns of the Doctor, which sets him off on his whole path of life, and it's also where he learns Belinda's name to later tell the Doctor in that scene we've just talked about. But here's the sticky point, because from the Doctor's perspective, that scene in the TARDIS where he confronts Conrad has already happened, because remember, that happened before he met Belinda. That's how he learned Belinda's name. So from his perspective, that's already happened. He knows that he got Belinda's name from this person called Conrad. He knows who Conrad is. We can tell he's done a lot of research into Conrad before confronting him, because he even says how Conrad is going to die, at least in that timeline. So he's looked into him. And given that Conrad tells the story of this meeting on his podcast, Lucky Day, and the podcast where he interviews Ruby Sunday, you'd think the Doctor would know that's when Conrad, the adult, first met him, and therefore would know this story from Conrad's perspective by the time he encounters it from his perspective. So why doesn't he acknowledge at all, even in any kind of facial expression that I could see going back on it, that that's likely the same boy that would later grow into be the man Conrad? There is seemingly no recollection on his face, and when I first spotted this, I was thinking, oh, that's a slip, that's a slight continuity error. But maybe it's not. Because remember what the Doctor said when he told Belinda that someone had given him his name.
kind of a long story, and I've got to be careful about timelines.
So what if in that scene set in 2007, he knows exactly who he's talking to, he knows that's the boy who's going to grow up to break his friend's heart, but he also knows that the timeline needs to be maintained in order for that boy to then grow up and be in that TARDIS with him, which has already happened to the Doctor, so that then he can be given Belinda's name and be where he is now. Because if he messes with that, he might not meet Belinda. And then we've got a whole paradox. So maybe, yes, maybe he does actually recognise Conrad, but he can't show it. He has to play out that exactly as it was described on the podcast so that the timeline is maintained. And why not? Because as far as he knows, it all works out kind of well in the end. Conrad, yes, his friend's heart gets broken, but ultimately Conrad ends up in prison and as far as the Doctor knows, dies there of a heart attack. So as far as he knows, there's no harm in playing along with this. What he doesn't account for is Mrs. Flood. Because once Conrad is returned to his cell by the Doctor, that's when we see Mrs. Flood approaching, saying that she's the governor, and dangling a set of keys, seemingly letting him out. We know that Conrad is going to play a big part in the season finale. We know that it's called the Reality War. He makes a line in his confrontation with the Doctor. He talks about rejecting the Doctor's reality. These are all going to tie in together. Somehow Mrs. Flood is going to use Conrad to reshape reality and timelines are going to change. But at this point, the Doctor doesn't know that, which is why he just pretends he doesn't know who this little boy is. So that's that scene and that potential inconsistency explained away. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments below. What do you think is going to happen next? What are Mrs. Flood's plans and how is she going to use Conrad to reshape reality? Let me know your comments below and why not check out mine and my 10-year-old daughter's review of Lucky Day by clicking on screen now.